Hey folks, so today we have an awesome person here. Yeah, I guess you would have understood it. Shiva is there through the title of this podcast. So it's basically Shiva is a software engineer who is, primarily focuses most of his time on open source, machine learning, and full stack web development. And, he's actively involved in various communities in CNCF, TensorFlow, as a mentor in programs GSOC, yeah, aka Google Summer of Code, and yeah, even in MLH fellowship. So that's about it. And for today we are going to talk about the future of AI and open source. So yeah, let's get started. Hey Shivay.
Hi Pulkit, how are you?
Yeah, great going. What about you?
I'm doing well. It's really great to collaborate with you again. Last time we met for Google I/O Extended, and thanks for having
Yeah.
me as a speaker then, and thanks for having me on your podcast again.
Yeah, my pleasure. So it's basically that today we are going to talk about something really great, and I think everyone knows about you, but I would request to have a small intro from your side. So
Sure,
you can take
absolutely.
up the stage.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, for those folks who might not be knowing me, I'm Shivay. I graduated last year from undergraduate degree in computer science. I have been living and I was born and brought up at in New Delhi, India, and most of my time sort of goes into three core things. One is open source, web development, and DevOps and machine learning. So it's sort of an intersection of all these three things that I really love working with. So whether it's MLOps or it's integrating machine learning with web development using TensorFlow JS, those are the things that really I feel passionate about and have been involved with a lot of different other communities, mentoring and sort of interacting with folks from the communities and helping them out as well. Some of them include Layer 5 that comes under the CNCF, TensorFlow itself, and I've been involved with it in Google Source Code as a mentor for open source in specifically in TensorFlow JS. And apart from that, I have also an inherent love for hackathons as a attendee, mentor, judge, or even an organizer. So I have met probably the best of folks from all these tech communities, and especially the machine learning communities. So that's what I'm really passionate about, and today we are going to be talking about the future of AI and open source.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. So I'm glad that you have been part of such a great communities, and yeah, that really motivates me as well to get into these stuffs right now.
Yeah,
So let's get into our podcast main topic right now. So first of all, tell me what is AI, because this is something most trending stuff in this world right now, according to
yeah.
me, if I know. So
Yeah, absolutely. AI, you'll hear about AI, you'll see it in the news, you'll you know hear people having conversation about it, you'll see it being discussed everywhere because AI or artificial intelligence today is literally, I mean, I'll go on to say this, that it is being used literally in each and every aspect of life or industry that you can think of, whether it's healthcare, education, manufacturing, or whatever you might think of. You'll find at least some of the use cases over there. And sort of to define AI, like what I believe about AI is that humans, and especially computer engineers, they have always been fascinated by how humans think, right? And for us, like from historical times when we had our first ever computer, right, the major aim was to be able to use these computers to solve problems. Those were either redundant or those were repetitive, and just you know save time of humans and be able to solve those problems. And traditionally these computers have been, so how they function is they take an input, they process it, and they give an output. but they didn't really have their own kind of thinking or logical ability to decipher problem and then come to a solution, come to a rational and a goal oriented solution. But that changed with AI, and the main perspective of AI is to be able to use the decisions, use the thinking capabilities of how humans come and they approach a problem, and they derive a solution for it, be able to use that same kind of knowledge base and same thinking patterns and apply them to a computer, so that the computer has a similar kind of an ability to solve problems in a goal oriented, in a rational way. So I would say that it sort of involves three different processes. One is to be able to observe something, right? Let's say you are faced with a problem, to be able to observe the problem, make some kind of inferences from it, and then act upon it in a logical way. And those are the three primary goals that we intend to have in AI. So to give human like intelligence to the machines, right, to be able to carry out such kind of logical problems, right, to be able to solve those problems in a logical and a rational way. And I mean that's what AI is really all about.
Yeah, awesome. Like, if that's right, like just human consciousness has been took up
Yeah,
in artificial way, if I'm not wrong, right?
absolutely. That what I
So,
was saying for a couple of minutes, you summed it up in a line. Yeah,
so like in the current situation, there are various sci-fi movies going on regarding AI and stuff. So, do you really think like AI in future can dominate the whole world in like including humans? Like this is something like everyone gets confused through this sci-fi movies. So,
yeah.
what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Pulkit, that AI today is being used in multiple aspects, right? And we are seeing that AI is truly becoming powerful. We have seen AI being used in creating these deep fakes, or let's say, we hear about these news that AI player was able to beat the world's best players in chess in a matter of minutes, right? And then a lot of other complex games where the world leaders in those games were easily beaten by AI. So of course, there is a lot of prospect when it comes to AI being able to solve really complex problems, right? And a lot of it that is highlighted, in a negative manner or in a more over glorified manner in these sci-fi movies, where it's like what we also call as super intelligence, right? We sort of term that, and a lot of industry leading folks like Elon Musk have shared their sort of like interest in terms of all these topics that AI in the future might be able to overtake the world. Now, I personally do not really feel that is going to be there, at least in the near future. But of course, the most important aspect that we have to keep in mind is that with any other technology, AI has to be used in an ethical manner, right? There have been cases where AI has sort of gone into unexpected routes. One of those is a really popular, thing that happened when Facebook had created these they had created these chatbots that were originally planned to help businesses on the Facebook Messenger. But what they witnessed was that two of these chatbots, they designed their own language in which they started speaking to one another. And those are some of the things that you can expect, right? When as and when AI actually goes, and goes into more and more, we see AI going into more and more different avenues, and we see it becoming more and more powerful. But definitely at this point of time, I don't see that happening in like in any time in the future. But of course, at the same time, we need to make sure as AI developers or advocates about AI that AI is being used in a good manner. It's being used to solve problems and not being used, for unethical or vices. So that ethical use of AI is super important, and a lot of discussions, debates actually take place on things like facial recognition or those kind of softwares, right? So as practitioners for AI, it's really important to make sure that we are able to use them in ethical manners.
Yep, got it. So, like, Does it really necessary means, because there are various stuffs going on in this world right now. There are so much stuffs like IoT, full stack, like full stack web development and other stuffs as well, right? So do you really think a person who is like don't have any background in tech can get into this field?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just learning the most basic core concepts that are required. Now, when it comes to machine learning or AI, some of the more core concepts that you require is at least an expertise in, or not even an expertise, but at least basic knowledge of at least one programming language. So you should be familiar with how programming and how logics are developed in programming, and then let's say basics of statistics and mathematics, because machine learning, AI are very heavily focused on things like statistics. So concepts like probability, linear algebra, a lot of statistical concepts like mean, mode, variance, standard deviation. All these are regularly used in AI, because whatever different kind of data that you might be having on which you're applying AI or machine learning based algorithms, all of that data is goes into conversion, right? It's converted into the mathematical format, and then you have all of these different mathematical processes that take place on this data, and that data undergoes some kind of substitution and then changes, and then it's reflected back into a format that humans are able to sort of see. So those are some of the prerequisites when it comes to AI specifically, and with when it comes to other types of technologies, again, you just need to be aware of the most basic fundamentals of computer science, or in general about programming, and that should be suffice to at least get started.
Okay, got it. So even I'm trying my best to get into it. So basically, like again, getting back to that sci-fi stuff. Like recently, there was one movie, Godzilla versus Kong. Like
Yeah,
I guess you would be even aware of that. Like this is one, and I guess there were around more such movies. I can't include. Like I'm forgetting the name, but the thing is that there was a scene like having a mechanical Godzilla who was controlled by a human mind, like that the program overrides and like dominates that person's head, and basically takes up the whole control over it, right? Like
yeah,
basically having the whole consciousness in the same way of Godzilla, right? So
yeah,
can it really happen? Because like as per my thing, I think it was moreover controlled by a brain, right? So
yeah, yeah,
like if it's gonna be controlled by a brain, I guess the program couldn't be have such type of program that can override and like take up the whole like whole automation in on their self, right? So what are your thoughts on it?
yeah, Pulkit. I mean, this is such a good question, and this sort of brings to the foray two major points of AI, right? And I would love to talk about both of them in this regard. So the
Sure.
first one, let's talk about how these human brain interactions take place, right? So AI today is being used a lot in neurosciences, being able to detect the whatever is happening inside of the brain. And again, as I've mentioned, that computer scientists have always been amazed by the inner structure of how brains work, right? And to understand that, we need to also sort of dive a little into the biology of the brain. Of course, I mean, this is a technical, geeky computer science session, but of course, let's just dive deep into the neurons and how they work, right? So, of course, our brain is collectively made up of a lot of neurons connected to the rest of the body. And whenever, let's say, for example, you touch a hot vessel, immediate reaction is that you withdraw your hand, right? So how that functions is your brain is able to detect the event that you're touching a hot object, and it triggers an electrical signal that travels from your neuron to other parts of your body, right? And it does very intelligent selection. It does not send your like that particular message that you have to withdraw your hand. It does not send that to your leg. You're touching the vessel with your hand, so your leg doesn't get affected from it. So it is very selective in the wide network of neurons that is in your body, right? And it takes
Like
that
in technical
action.
terms, there is a sensor that is, like sensing the stuff
Exactly.
and giving the commands to our brain, if I'm not
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah, yeah. So basically, it goes to that specific muscle, right? So it's very selective, and it is able to intelligently decipher this the problem. So similarly, machine learning today, or at least AI, is being used in neural sciences, where what we are doing is that we are trying to understand the brain patterns, right? How whenever we think about anything, if we are able to control that, and how that happens is we put up these huge sensors. You might have seen that, in sci-fi movies, that you have this apparatus that has a lot of sensors, and you connect those, onto various parts of your skull or of your head, and those are able to track the electrical impulses that are generated inside the brain, and they're able to analyze those, right? So what's happening is that you are made to think about different kinds of situations, and as your brain responds and releases these electrical impulses, these are detected by this apparatus, right? And this apparatus sends these brain signals to a system, right, where we're using a lot of different neural networks and convolutional neural networks and all these different machine learning algorithms to understand how these brain signals are generated, and the various patterns inside of these brain signals, to be able to decipher multiple situations. Let's say, when, let's say, you're getting scared, or you're getting frightened, you're getting excited, you're getting surprised, right? All these different kind of emotions, we're trying to decipher from these patterns in these brain signals, right? And that is what is being used to understand in various, things like human psychology, right? Being able to understand what a person is thinking, and being able to understand, okay, what emotion are they going through, or let's say being able to control IoT based devices, or these robotic devices, by just whatever you're thinking. Again, that is involving the brain signals, these electrical signals, and being able to decipher them into, let's say, an appropriate action. So this is being used for clinically, people who are facing, issues. Let's say it could be a motor driven diseases, right? We have a lot of where people are not able to move their limbs, and they are able to do that by controlling their brain, and we are able to decipher, okay, like, this is the action that they're trying to, use. Let's say some of this research is going into deciphering how humans are affected by their dreams. Why do actually dreams come up, right? They're artificially synthesizing these dreams, and all of this is being happened by understanding the brainwave patterns and being able to decipher them into relevant categories by using relevant AI-based algorithms. Where we are particularly, what the core interest is, how, the human brain, and how the signals, and how basically the human thinking is actually taking place by taking into account all these different kind of use cases. And that is what was also, I personally haven't really seen the Godzilla versus Kong movie, but I believe that's what was being done, right? That we're trying to replicate whatever the human was thinking, that is controlling this monster, or whatever Godzilla, that there was, and that is being used to, control the arm movements and movements of the robot. And that is what is happening in real life as well at this point of time, although not at that destructive scale that, we saw in that movie. But of course, it's being used to do minor operations, like, let's say, lifting a robotic hand, grabbing something using that robotic hand, right? So those are the experiments that are happening right now. Of course, it's still, I would say, not at a stage where it can be used in large scale applications. It's still limited to, of course, there are some examples that we're seeing in production, but again, not at a very large scale. So it's still under a lot of development. We're seeing the extent of at which we can utilize all of this, right? But now, coming on to the other aspect of this solution that you have mentioned, right? That is the self-learning of the AI algorithms, right? So we say there is, like, when we talk about machine learning, we have supervised machine learning, where we give the datasets and the relevant labels to the machine learning algorithms, and then we have the unsupervised learning, right, where we do not give the labels to the machine learning algorithm, and the machine learning, like, algorithm, they are able to decipher as more and more data is given to them. They are able to decipher the problems, and they're able to, come to the solutions. So that is that. And then we have something called as reinforcement learning, where the machine learning algorithm is actually updating itself based on the environment that it is part of. And an example of that is self-learning robots, where they are given, we have something called as the Sophia robot, right? You might have probably heard about that robot. And these are able to make themselves more, or they are able to adapt themselves better without any human intervention, by understanding the environment that they're around themselves, and they're able to upgrade their algorithm in that way. Of course, the algorithm itself is the same, but they're able to make themselves more intelligent and more conscious about the environment, right? And that is where we can think about this Godzilla, right? That, hey, I mean, right now it was being controlled by the human intelligence, but as it trains itself, right, it gains more and more data. It is able to become more conscious about the environment, about it itself. At certain point of time, it is able to make those decisions on its own. And even if it is coming across newer situations, it is able to learn from the previous experiences and derive relevant things that it has to do. And that is where the self-learning aspect of the AI comes into the foray, right? The self-learning or reinforcement learning, all of these come into the foray. And definitely it's a possibility that you might see certain actions that were not originally intended to be trained by the human, or let's say in this case by the brain. Like, the AI is able to do something that is not originally designed for it to do, and it is actually not given to it when we were having these, human control or brain controlled movements. So it's definitely a possibility. And I, again, at this point of time, it's not something that can be so drastic that this machine or this AI goes on to destroy everything else, right? So that is where we see that the super intelligence is over glorified. Otherwise, if it was not done, then how would the movie sell? Or how would it, bring in people to get hooked up to the movie? So we are definitely not at that stage where we are, going to be blown away by AI, or AI is going to be taking over the world. But at the same time, it sort of brings back to that question, right? That how AI is evolving, and being conscious about the involvement of AI, and making sure that it is not being used for any unethical purposes. So that still sort of remains the same when it comes to AI. Not an answer.
So basically, like, my question was that in that movie that there was a person who was an AI engineer, and that person developed an actual AI, like fully consciousness having bot, like robot, which can like work from like the whole process of a living organism. Like, the thing was that that robot learned a lot, and at last what happened, whenever you put it on your head, like that will store all of your data, like brain's data. And then, like, if you apply that that whole data into any other bot, it would be like that whole consciousness would be forwarded to that particular robot. So is it possible that like our own brain's data can be stored and be like can be reused in artificial intelligence? I'm not sure if it can be included in this stuff, but yeah, my question.
So, I mean, I have a slightly different take on this. And for me, see, when it comes to the brain, right, we have two things. One is, of course, the logical thinking capabilities of the brain. And the other one is the sentiments that human have, right? The consciousness, and how your consciousness is also decided by the sentiments that you have, right? And I believe that, yes, possibly in the future, definitely not at this point of time, but possibly in the future, you might be able to decode everything that the brain has to offer and try to replicate that. But that human sentiment that is, there, I don't think so that's going to be the same way in which humans react. That's going to be possible to replicate directly inside of the AI, because that is something that is always going to differ the AI from the humans, right? That human sentiment and ability to change your consciousness. I mean, those are the things that are again going slightly off topic, but since this question has been raised, I am of the person believe that yes, you probably might be able to replicate everything that a particular person is able to think about, but that human touch is still going to be missing to a certain extent. But we are
Yep, got
definitely
it. So,
way far off right now from doing that, right?
yeah,
Being able to replicate the
like
entire
I
human
guess it is
intellect.
something related to Neuralink that Elon
Yeah,
Musk has started.
yeah,
Like in that you would be like providing the data to the brain, and the question was how we can replicate that data from brain to an mechanical organism, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So yeah, got it. Like I know it's been like it can be a long time to get to that point, but yeah, like just for now we can imagine that, and like at some point we may
yeah.
have it in real life, right?
Absolutely. See, it's
So
possible. Yeah. So it is definitely possible. But what I'm saying is that I highly doubt, at least from the current technology that we have, and of course, I mean, Neuralink, all of these different technologies, like they are deep mind, right? All these are doing a lot of things with specifically with respect to the human intelligence and how we are able to replicate that into AI. But again, that human touch sentiment is something that will be very difficult to have. Again, I don't really have a lot of experience in that, but that's what I just believe from at least what
yep,
having
yep,
learned
got
and
it.
having done
It
AI.
is something like I have been into like astronomy stuff. So
Yeah,
there is like there is an theory that everything like has an information, like everything is an information
yeah,
that will never get destroyed, even if you
yeah,
like even after we die, right?
yeah,
Our body is gonna be there in some way, like in any way that's possible, right? And it's basically like whenever like burn out like burn a paper, it would get into ash, right? But the thing is, like at some point we may have a technology. I know it's too far for it, but like it can be possible. We can decode that and have like what was drawn on that paper through maybe any of the technology stuff, right? So
yeah,
in the
yeah,
same way, I guess, like not actually same way, but at some point, yeah, same way for the brain as well. I know brain is something more complex than this, but
yeah.
again, maybe possible. Yeah. So I guess we have talked a lot about AI right now. Let's switch switch up to even open source stuff. So just tell me, like, brief me out, what is open source? Like many of the students who just get started have this common question, what is open source? So it
Yeah.
would really help us a lot. So
Yeah. So open source, without moving into the coding aspect of it, open source is a philosophy, right? Open source is not just limited to software development. It is a philosophy that is being used elsewhere as well, where any kind of a product design or an idea can be also acquired and can be utilized by others, right? Again, there's no discrimination that will happen in terms of where you live or who you are as a person. You can use those designs, or you can use that sentiment or that thoughts for your, let's say, for your own use, or you could modify it and share it with others. So now coming to software development, right? So open is really, I mean, if we break it down into the two words, open and source. So open is that it is open for anyone and anyone, right? Everyone and anyone, regardless of your age, gender, location, that you can contribute to it, you can access that, right? And source means that basically the source code, right? So basically, the idea is to be able to create these softwares, these codes, right, that are accessible by anyone. They can be modified by anyone, and then they can be reutilized multiple times without having to, let's say, put a licensing fee, or having, let's say, limited number of times that you can actually use the software. So that is the core aspect of open source. But what we today as software developers are more sort of passionate about is FOSS, that is free and open source. And this free does not only mean that it has to be free of cost, but also that you have the freedom to reuse it, freedom to modify it, and then free to redistribute it in, like, let's say, based on any kind of modifications that you have done to it. So that's really the core aspect or the fundamental behind open source.
like something like Linux stuff where we can,
Yeah,
reuse Linux kernel and have our own distribution through other
yeah, our
distro,
own
if I'm
distro.
not wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So like I got it. So like in this moment, like at least in India, I can see that
Yeah,
majority of the student folks are getting into this open source stuff, right? So
yeah.
do you really think does it matter for a student to get into open source, and like is it necessary?
I would say definitely, because open source gives you real world programming experience. So as a student, right, and at least I'm talking about in India because I'm not really aware of the situation outside of India, but at least in India, the kind of curriculum that we are taught in colleges and in schools is far off from what is expected when you join a company, let's say for an internship or as a full-time role. The kind of tools that you use, the kind of best practices when it comes to software development, right, code practices, code writing practices that you do are far off, right, from what you might be doing inside of a laboratory or inside of a lab, instead of a college and in real world, right? So there are two ways to get experience for that. Either you apply for an internship during your college time, right? You apply for an internship, you go and attend that internship and you learn all those skills. Or alternatively, when you're not in an internship and you're still in your college attending, because internships, it depends from college to college, but like, at least in your initial years, you're only able to do internship during your winter break or your summer break, right? You cannot do in, like, generally colleges might not allow you to do you know in the site. But what you can do is open source, because these open source projects themselves are being utilized by hundreds and thousands of folks from the communities, right, by companies. And actually some of these softwares are being utilized internally by the companies themselves. So let's say you join Apple, you will get exposed to Kubernetes, to Jenkins. These themselves are really huge open source tools that people are using, and these are being used in a professional setup as well by these companies, right? So by being able to directly contribute to these open source projects, you learn a lot. First, you're contributing to these projects that are being used by millions of developers, and then because these are also being used by companies, you inherently you are learning good practices when it comes to software development that are also going to be expected when you join a company for an internship role. So whether it's actually writing proper code, code logics, writing proper having proper indentation, having proper nomenclature of functions or the type of functions that you're using. For example, in JavaScript, whether you're going to be using, let's say in React, you're going to be using a functional component or a class-based component, or you're using an arrow function or a novel function. So all of those different things will something that you'll be learning by contributing to open source projects. But apart from that, you'll also be learning about how to write test cases, what are tests, like what is testing in software development, how to do deployment in software development. All of these different things you will be learning when it comes to open source, right? So by contributing to open source, right, so these are things that as a student, these are golden, right? These are golden opportunities that you can learn while being in school, by while being in college, right? And even if you're, let's say, 13-year-old like Pulkit, who is, I mean, I want to just give a shout out to the kind of things that he's doing at his age. I was busy playing Pokemon, or like doing all these things, although I had started
Even I
doing
do,
basic
even I do.
no, I mean,
Yeah,
but you're
even
still
I do
involved.
test.
Yeah. So I had started my programming journey. I mean, you could say programming because HTML, CSS is like it's part of the programming. But I had started when I was 12 years old. But of course, I mean, that was only like, let's say, 1 or 2% of my entire time. I was busy playing games or playing outside. So of course, I mean, and of course, like Google used to have the Google coding, for students who were from the age of 11 to 18, that for school students who want to contribute to open source.
I
So
guess it
open
is
source is
13 to 18 right now, if I'm not wrong.
13 to 18, but it actually got closed. So I
Yeah.
guess, yeah, most probably it was 13 to 18. Yeah. But this goes on to showcase that open source is really for everyone, right? And even if you are not really well versed with programming, you can do non-code related contributions, whether it's documentation, community-based efforts, right? For example, Pulkit is doing community-based efforts at Sphere, right? That's the company name.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Q-sphere.
cubesphere. So you can do all those different things as well to be involved with technology and to be involved with open source. But definitely, I mean, open source has a lot to offer. You learn a lot of different skills. You learn programming languages. You learn about best practices. You learn about design skills. You learn about how to architect something. You learn about testing and all these different things if you're truly involved with open source projects. And all of this can be done by sitting at the comfort of your home by contributing to these open source projects. So it's super important for a student to contribute to open source.
Yep, got it. Such a great points going on, and even got a shout out in between. So my another question is basically like that there are many people other than just techie folks, right? So what about them? And like does it really necessary means that those folks should even get into open source? Because like we talked about tech, right? But what about others who are not in tech? And does it really mean for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, for them, what these solutions they entail, there are two ways to look at it. One is, let's say they are a direct consumer of these open source projects, or they can be involved with these open source projects in a non-technical way. So I just mentioned about the non-code contributions, right? Being able to write use case stories of using these products as end result to ensure that yes, these products are being utilized by more and more people, and these reach out to more and more folks. So writing use case examples, writing examples of customer stories, right? Or let's say being able to share your experiences using these products, or at the same time being involved with community driven efforts, or being able to write documentation that is relevant to these projects, right, is something that someone who is not from a technical background can actually get involved with, right? They can get involved with all these different ways in which they are utilizing these projects. And at the same time, they could also be the end users of these projects, right? So how could you be an end user? Let's say that there is a specific open source project that helps you to convert like let's say a word document into a pdf, right? There could be specific documents that might be doing that, right? So one way could be that. Another example of this could be, let's say you create an open source software that is an alternative to Photoshop, right? That, and there are actually, like, you have gim, right? Gimp animations, you might have heard about Gimp. It's an old open source alternative to Photoshop, and again, a lot of people actually use Gimp, right? So it could either be people who are still involved with these projects but are doing non-code related contributions, or they are the end users of these projects. And of course, someone who might get an alternative to Photoshop, which cost a lot of, and might not be accessible by a lot of people, they can use these open source alternatives, right, which provide the same level of user experience, and they can do the same kind of things with that software. But again, they don't have to pay for it. They don't have to pay for the licensing, right? And they're able to use them for free of cost. So even that is way, like, people can get benefited from these softwares.
Yeah, makes sense. So, like, we are getting to our end of this podcast. So, some of the last questions right now, like, what are the future scopes of open source more specifically?
Yeah, the future scope is endless. And today we have seen large companies like Microsoft that back in 1998 said that open source cannot exist. And in 2018, exactly after 20 years, they bought GitHub, which is the world's largest repository of open source, right? For a lot of different open source projects. I mean, I'm not exactly aware of the exact amount. It was something close to $3 or $4 billion, right? So they bought GitHub, right? And that just goes on to showcase the power of open source. Today, a lot of job opportunities, specifically for open source developers, are opening up. A lot of softwares are, converting into an open source way, and open source is there to stay, and it's going to be expanding to a lot of other avenues. And when it comes to machine learning as well and open source, we are seeing a lot of different libraries like TensorFlow, PyTorch, Onyx by Microsoft. Like, all these are being widely used in a lot of different research production environments, right? and it's there, right? MLOps, when it comes to MLOps, we have basically within communities we have a lot of open basically we have a lot of things happening in terms of kubeflow, which is basically being used for MLOps, specifically in the Kubernetes environment, in the cloud environment. Even that is something that is growing a lot of popularity. So it definitely has a lot of scope and a future, right? People are moving towards open source development best practices within their companies as well, because it has been really effective, and we're seeing a lot of softwares that are like open sourced. So definitely a lot of scope.
Got it. So I guess the folks who are, watching this podcast would be hopefully getting into open source as well. So
Yeah,
best of luck for them. And yeah, like as same for AI, like any future scopes more specific to AI. Like
yeah.
we talked about it as well, but again, you know,
Absolutely. So, future scope, what I believe is that, of course, these human interactions and how we can utilize them in ways like in human psychology, making automated decisions, and helping out in healthcare, right? Being able to create these self-navigating robots that can navigate in your body and let's say treat tumors, right? All basically use them in medical science is something that I feel is going to be of huge impact. Being able to use AI in linguistics, computational uh, biology, right? Genomatics, using being used in DNA refactoring. All of that are some of the use cases that I feel will see a lot of interest and garner a lot of focus of AI in these specific fields.
basically like we have done with a lot of stuff, and we have get to our almost end of this podcast here. So any last points you would like to add for our audience for more specific to AI and open source?
Yeah, I mean, AI and open source both are beautiful, and when you combine them, that's even even better. If you have any questions with regards to TensorFlow or AI ML, you can definitely reach out to me. Of course, these are ever expanding fields, and just you need to get started. You have to kickstart your career, right? You have to kickstart your journey. You Open source is for everyone and for anyone. You don't have to wait for, let's say, becoming a pro in programming to be able to contribute to open source. You can, like, at this very time, get started by doing a lot of other non-coding contributions as well. So you just have to get started whenever you feel you have to get started. Like, just get started with that, and don't get disheartened, because at times with technology it can take time to do certain things, but you have to be patient, and you just have to strive, and make the efforts to become successful in whatever field, whether it's AI, it's open source, or it's a cross section of AI and open source. So that's what I would like to sort of close this particular podcast with this statement.
Yep. So that's all for this podcast. I hope you all like it. And
Yep.
yeah, make sure to, share it with everyone so that even your friends and your known one can get to know more about AI and open source more specifically, right?
Yep.
So with that, thank you so much for joining us here. And yep, that's it for today.
Thank you very much, Pulkit. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, bye bye.